Okay, this is the Module 7 video, and we'll go ahead and get started. You finished reading, or you're going to read Chapter 7 in the Spring Book, and that basically talks about how multiculturalism um, led to the failure of the common schools because of many, discriminatory practices across the nation and segregation of different ethnicities based on, well, either ethnicities or even, as we learned earlier, based on religious denominations. So you're going to learn a little bit more in this chapter about why the common school idea fizzled out and essentially, didn't make it. But he also talks about in this particular chapter the rise of a couple of black leaders, African American leaders, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and their different approaches to promoting social equality for blacks in this country. And there's a PowerPoint I think I provided for that, and if you click on some of the links in the PowerPoint, it'll take you to a couple of really short biographical videos, I think from the History Channel or something, about those two men, because they're very pivotal in how education was approached and how the fight for education was approached. And that's all going to lead us up to, what we're approaching quickly in history is, the desegregation of schools, the overturning of Plessy v. Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, and so forth. But I did include another PowerPoint in this module as well, and that PowerPoint is actually a lecture PowerPoint, and it went a little bit long. It's about 20 minutes, but it tells the story of segregation across the country and a little bit of background, as to where and why these things happened. But just know that it wasn't always, it hasn't and still isn't just a black-white issue. It's an issue that affects many different ethnicities across the nation. And the PowerPoint or the lecture that I'll give you gives you some examples of different court cases that were very prominent in addition to the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education ruling. So, and another theme, of course, is throughout that is how do we define race? What criteria do we use nowadays to do that? So you'll find out in that particular lecture. Okay, so then for the other two books, Darling Hammond and Ravitch, you read chapters 5. Well, actually in the Darling Hammond, I don't think I made you read chapter 5. If you would like to read chapter 5, please go ahead. But I think if you read the end part, I think it's page 161 to 162, if you read the moral of the stories, I think is what she gets at, it gives you sort of her wrap-up of what she, was getting at with that whole chapter, and that is that states using resources, using funding, can do a good job with that funding and those resources, and they can do a very bad job with that funding. And she used Connecticut and North Carolina as her examples of good ways to use resources. And of course she uses California, where I was raised, where I went to school, as a very bad example of what to do or what not to do with funding and resources and how they kind of went wrong, in California's defense. And yes, this is a native Californian who's making this defense, but I think anyone can recognize that, Connecticut is this big and, California is this big. So obviously you're in any bureaucracy, the bigger that it gets, it's going to be harder to control and harder to handle. So I think that those are definitely some things to keep in mind. And remember, she's housed at Stanford in California as well, so she has very intimate knowledge of California's inner workings. But anyway, I think what she found that was key was development all around. You need teaching development. You need leadership development. You need to invest in teachers, because that's going to be her constant, trope, is that teachers are really key here. The better prepared, more experienced, a better trained, better educated teacher is really going to provide you the best returns for your money, no matter what. And then, of course, early childhood development is another thing that she found that was definitely key. In California, there was mismanagement and neglect, prescriptive curriculum models, inadequate funding, and they didn't enforce their own policies. And that's key too. You know, obviously, when you become a parent, I think you realize more than ever that what gets enforced gets done. And if you tell someone to go brush their teeth every night, but you don't actually follow up and check on them, you don't know that it's actually being done. You know, and I'm just using some simplistic examples here, but it's true. If you don't monitor something, if you don't really follow up on something, there's really no chance that it's probably going to be implemented or done the way you want it to be done. So what works? Let's see. I took down some notes of what she says does work. And that is according to the examples in research. Well-trained teachers, I talked about that already, especially those who can teach to multiple learning modes, okay? And that's why I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but hopefully you're learning in other classes, you know, the different types of, you know, learning. I can't even remember what they're called now, but, you know, there's auditory and tactile and kinesthetic and all these different types of learning modes that children have, as well as different intelligences. You know, hopefully they'll talk about that. But good and relevant curriculum is another key finding of what works. Personalization, okay, allows students and teachers a good relationship. And if you have teach to the test, accountability type of environment, it's really hard to build rapport and build personalized relationships with students. And then skilled leaders who develop good relationships with the community, because that is definitely key as well. And I've worked in 4 different schools in my life, so I think I have an idea. And at most of those schools, the principals had very good relationship with the community, and it made our job so much easier. At one school I did work at, the principal did not have a good relationship with the members of the community, and it definitely made our jobs harder. So obviously that can be key as well. So then in Ravitch, you do have to read the whole chapter, chapter 5, and she talks about the business model schools of New York. And what happens, you know, in democracy, in what we've grown to understand about democracy, is that you have checks and balances for power in government, for leaders and so forth. What happens when you remove those checks and balances and, you know, for a public good, like schooling, like public schooling, and what lessons can be learned from that? So that's essentially what that chapter is about, and I believe that that's what your journal entry will be on for this module, will be about chapter 5, Ravitch. But the discussion prompt for this module is going to be a little question about some of the differences between Du Bois and Washington from the Spring Book. So you're going to go ahead and do the discussion prompt and the journal entry. Please be thinking about what movies you're going to watch for the Schools in Film essay. It's a critique essay that you're going to write. And I give you a lot of leeway. I give you some ideas. Please go and check into that in the assignments folder and be looking at the 2 movies that you're going to compare and contrast and critique, essentially. So I give you a breakdown of what the actual assignment is and how you should approach it. And just know that this is an assignment, you know, most of the assignments so far, I think you'll notice, are relatively simple. And if you do them, you know, I evaluate them and I look at all of them. But, you know, this particular assignment I do grade very, and I don't want to say hard, but it's not an easy A. So make sure that you're thinking about this and you're using, you know, an analytical approach to interpret these movies and some of the questions that I've asked you, you know, to accomplish with regard to this assignment. And then, of course, we're going to be moving into midterm time by next module, and I'll talk about that more in the next Module 8 video.